king of podcasts, proudly presents The Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the king of podcasts.
Thanks for joining me for another Broadcasters Podcast, broadcasterspodcast.com. Glad to have you here. So we're going to talk about the movies. Last week, I got a chance to finally go see Tenet. Or actually, I said I was going to go see Tenet, and I did. And it was great. I really loved it. I want to talk a little bit about my experience in the movie theater, and unfortunately, the fact that there were a number of people that did not decide to do the same thing as me to go to the movies. So we're going to talk about that. And there's a lot of reasons why, and I have to blame Hollywood for a lot of reasons as to why the panic that they put during this pandemic really hurt things. And we're going to talk all about that coming up here on the program. So we'll go through how Tenet did and what the studios and the exhibitors need to do seriously right now to save moviegoing because of how things have turned out so far with movies coming back. I spent some time talking about Ellen DeGeneres and some of the issues she has with her shows. Well, it's not just the Ellen show that had abusive employee relationships and bad work culture. It wasn't even just that. It's also other shows within a particular studio that's having these problems. We're going to talk all about that in a few minutes. And I'll talk some stuff about news. Our news company is already putting diversity pledges on the back burner. And money going into music IP, which could change the music industry forever. Want to know what that's all about? We'll talk about that as well. That's all coming up right here on the Broadcasters Podcast, episode number 140. So thank you for being in and checking it out. As you do, finding the show through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and so many other places. So I went Friday night, first time in almost 6 months to the day, to go to my Regal Theater, just about 5 minutes from my house. So mask on, fine. Everything was good there. The experience itself, one of the things that was actually really nice is the fact that the movie theaters, you could tell they took a lot of time to really clean things up. It looked cleaner than it ever had done before. The Regal app now includes buying concessions online, so everything I bought online. I already had my tickets when I came in and was able to go and order concessions. 2 minutes later, already ready to pick up, and I was off. So I went to go see Tenet in their big RPX theater, which is kind of their version of IMAX, which like has the D-box kind of feel where you can actually feel like the action going on and feel real rumbling bass and good picture. Given the amount of time the theater had to get everything ready, one of the things that was actually really cool with the manager was that I wasn't sure if the RPX was actually always wired correctly because it sounded good, but it didn't sound great. Like it always sounded about 80% good. But then they told me that he was able to go and actually get the RPX system, the audio system fixed, get it rewired. They actually had an audio tech come in. They had time to go ahead and test everything out so that it sounded perfect. So like watching Tenet in the RPX was so great an experience. Popcorn tasted just like I remembered. And unfortunately, there have been times where I'll go to a movie at like a 10:30 showing like I did for Tenet in the RPX, and there might not be a lot of people that show up because the later movies don't get as much as the, say, early evening crowds, and you have more families going. So I'd imagine first off, there might be certain people that will not bring their families in there yet, which one of the things you could tell in the movies going on, starting off now, there is nothing child related in the movie theaters, nothing at all. And that's a problem. So when you're looking at what movies are available, I look at the weekend box office. What movies are there that really stand out for children? I mean, you could say SpongeBob, the SpongeBob movie, but it's not. I mean, other than that, there was nothing else. In the current grade of movies this past weekend, for the weekend ending September 11th, in the theaters that was available for kids to watch, because they weren't even planning on that. I don't even think they had any movies that were even classics that were brought on for that as well. They were going for the old school, diehard moviegoers, older and feeling like they would just feel comfortable to go. But having a family experience to go to the theaters, nothing considered whatsoever. That's why Hollywood's hurting, first of all. The second thing is, there's not a lot of new movies. And that's a bigger problem that we have, is that when I looked at the theater this past weekend to look at what movies were available, Tenet was the one movie that I wanted to go see that I thought, okay, I can go watch this and catch it. Otherwise, Tenet was running on like 8 screens, he told me, out of 18 theaters. And all 18 theaters were running at the same time, of course. They were all being staggered. So they probably had probably about 9 or 10 theaters operating, or maybe they had more and they were staggering, but they had 8 different screens they were rotating Tenet throughout the weekend. That's it. And he told me that they were averaging 8 people for theater at the most. So he didn't have any new movies to go with, and not even any classic movies that could really get out there. There are some that are going to be brought out just for a while, just for a short time. But to bring some real blockbuster movies to really bring things back, that was the plan for some of the theaters beforehand, but not here. It didn't happen. And it's unfortunate. So anyway, look at the weekend box office just for the domestics, because there were some movies that did well internationally. Tenet so far has pulled $29.5 million domestic, but has pulled $120 million overseas, bringing it to a little over 140 million tickets sold, which is good. It's not, I mean, again, this was a $200 million movie. It's going to make its money back, but I mean, you had to have something out there to bring people back in. You were going to have a good movie go out. Tenet was the one to go with because, you know, it's like, it's going to have a run, and I think you got to think about this too. Tenet's going to have to be a movie that gets held over for a significant amount of time. Okay, this is a wide-ranging movie. The ratings have not been that bad. I actually really enjoyed the movie. I think the only people that people might have had a little bit of an issue with was that it was long, and that's okay. I didn't mind that at all. I mean, and it was also kind of like an Inception where you really had to pay attention to what was going on. So keep that in mind when you go. There's a lot of pieces moving around. And to understand it, make sure you keep everything under some kind of a logic so you understand the story works out. But John David Washington, fantastic in this movie. Robert Pattinson, fantastic in this movie. It was better. It was as good as I thought it was going to be. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, it was amazing to hear it in the RPX. So my enjoyment of the theater was just like I remembered it. Just like I did when I left the last time. And this just happened to be, I got to go to a better movie this time. And I feel good about it. And I'm glad to have that back. Same thing else, I got to go back to the sports bar to go watch football. Just getting those comforts of home. Just the comforts of having what we normally have. Getting that back is wonderful. It's so great. So I enjoy all that. And having Tenet's back, I mean, that's good. And I do have a couple of other movies I can go watch. I saw that in my movie theater, they're going to have New Mutants. I don't know how good it will do, but I'll watch it. Possibly. Bill and Ted Face the Music. That was another one I was going to go see. We'll see how that does. Now, Bill and Ted Face the Music, that's a bit of a hodgepodge because it didn't get put out into a lot of different theaters. So Tenet was pushed out to 2,913 theaters. That's it. Normally, if you're getting the full gamut of all the theaters, it would be over 4,000 domestic. But what was missing? Well, the major states you're really missing right now would be New York, New Jersey, California. Like your tri-states in the Northeast. California still doesn't have movie theaters open. They're trying to get drive-thrus open to do Tenet. But that's it. I mean, you're talking about a bulk. That's tens of millions of people that might go see that movie. Seriously, you might have made an extra, I don't know, $20, $30 million extra from all this. But they don't have that now. The movie could at least made $50 million with all said and done in a couple of weeks. But again, what's going to happen with Tenet, it's got to be a movie that's going to be understood that is going to have a stretch. It's going to have a stretch of time to be out there because, again, for the movies coming back, it's not going to be like everybody's going to come back and catch the movies on time. For myself, you know, the movie came out, 2 weeks ago? It came out just before Labor Day weekend. And then I caught it, 10 days later, whatever it was. And that's what happened. But that's okay. I mean, it was the first chance I could go see it. Because my movie theaters were not open until September 8th. And then I waited the Friday after. But again, there's no other movies right now ready to come in that are really going to take some spots when this is all said and done. And that's what sucks as well. The other problem that also the manager of that theater was telling me about was there's not that many movies right now available. The movies he was telling me about, that there's nothing really big that's going to come out until November, because that's when November, all those movies were supposed to come in September, October, even as late as June, when we thought we were getting some movie theaters coming back. Well, we had to wait till September to get the movie theaters back, right around Labor Day. But then what happened was, you come to this point, and then wide release films are pushed back altogether, and some of them just got pushed away to next year. It's unfortunate that it happened, but that's where we are. Because now I look at the movies that are available. As of next week, Infidel, it's really a wide release movie. I don't know how well it's going to do, but it's a bit of a low budget film. I don't know if it's high budget. Jimmy Caviezel stars in it. I don't know if it's a movie that's going to stand out really big, but everything else on the 18th, this coming Friday, will be limited. Same thing for September 25th. Nothing wide release. And then October, we start seeing some movies coming back. And actually, October 2nd, we still have movies being pushed out limited. No widescreen releases for a good month. So right now, if I'm back now, going back to the theaters, and I have a free movie pass now because of my subscription for the next month, well, the thing is that I don't have a lot of movies to choose from. And that's what the problem is. Because we got a first batch of movies for the next month, the movies that you're going to work with right now that are going to be stretched out at this time is Unhinged with Russell Crowe, The New Mutants, Bill and Ted Face the Music, and Tenet. That's not much of a selection for moviegoers, because you don't have a horror movie. The thriller, Unhinged, no, but a horror movie, you don't have any horror movies right now. You have no children's flicks and no comedies. Well, I mean, Bill and Ted, but again, that's a bit of a stretch. And I mean, Tenet is an action movie, but also it's a bit of like a sci-fi kind of feel to it. There's, you would think at least maybe 4 to 6 to 7 movies that you'd have available normally to watch. But there's just no choices right now. And of the movies they had left, I mean, there's not much they could do about getting other movies that were out to bring them back to theaters from before, because they're all been moved down to video on demand. That's where we're at. So that's the biggest problem here. And again, when I look at the schedule, it's not until October 9th we start seeing some movies coming in. Honest Thief and The War with Grandpa, that's a Robert De Niro comedy. And Honest Thief, which is another Liam Neeson action movie, which I don't think is going to get too much talk, because it's just another Liam Neeson, cash grab to me, basically. Like, Honest Thief would be a movie that would be pushed out January, February. But right now, it doesn't matter what we are this time of year. Then you have no widescreen releases at this moment of October 16th. And then October 23rd, you have a couple of movies coming out. Connected, a Sony Pictures release. That stars Danny McBride, Maya Rudolph, Abby Jacobson, Eric Andre. It's there. Then Death on the Nile, which is one of the Agatha Christie novels they're pushing together. And that actually has a pretty good cast. Kenneth Branagh, Annette Bening, Russell Brand, Ali Fazal, Gal Gadot, Armie Hammer. So that actually should do quite well. Movie, murder mystery. So there's that coming up. And that's October 23rd. And then after that, October 30th, again, we're just streaming a couple of crumbs of movies that are available for wide release right now, as opposed to what was really out there for a long time. Fatale is another movie coming out October 30th, and that's Hilary Swank. Not much there. Again, the movies really start coming back in November. Black Widow comes out Marvel. That's November 6th. And then you have Deep Water, which will be out November 13th. Freaky. There's 3 movies coming out for wide release on the 6th. 3 on the 13th, 2 on the 6th. No Time to Die, the Bond movie, is still scheduled for November 20th. That is the movie that you'd hope will pull out some people to come to the theaters. because it's important. You have to hope that for Thanksgiving weekend, No Time to Die will have people getting a chance to really come back and be enticed to come back to the movie theaters. They put out some new trailers for it, and it looks great. And then there's a couple of movies set up for wide release November 25th. And then December, The Empty Man, and that is set up for December 4th. And that, there's nobody I know in the actual cast that I really am familiar with. A lot of character actors I noticed. But then the Christmas weekends. So December 18th, that's when you're going to have 3 rock solid movies coming out. You'll have Coming to America, and that will be the number 2 America, the sequel to Coming to America. So that should do really well. Big comedy for Christmas time. Dune, which I saw the previews for, coming out December 18th. That looks fantastic. It's also a very wide cast. When you look at the cast for that movie, and there's just so much behind it. Dave Bautista, Rebecca Ferguson, Stellan Skarsgård, Charlotte Rampling, Oscar Isaac, Josh Brolin, great Jason Momoa, Javier Bardem, great cast in that. So you got that going for you, and then you have West Side Story, and then Wonder Woman 1984 comes out Christmas night, along with News of the World. And that's where we're at. So there's not much to go with right there. It is what it is. News of the World is a Tom Hanks starred feature. So there we go. That's where the makeup of the movie industry is right now. But let's talk about what the industry is doing itself. I just wanted to make the case of the fact of when you don't have that many movies to work off of. I mean, when you started seeing movies coming back, maybe there were some small end features that could have been brought back to wide release and get it out now. Get it out early. Because you look at all those openings in October that you have. But I guess if they don't have California and New York open, well, that's upon the states to open up. At least to have drive-ins if they can't go into the freaking theaters. But again, there's just some lockdowns that are being held longer than others. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense to me. So the New York Times decides to put a story out to kind of just put a bit of a damper on the parade of the return of the movie industry. So the story starts, movie theaters returned, audiences didn't, now what? So they're saying as well that since people are not going to the movies anywhere close to the numbers that Hollywood hoped, studios are prompted to postpone more big releases. The next one that could go is Marvel's Black Widow. Well, again, if you're going to keep moving movies away, then what are you going to do? Just because New York and California are not open, you need to recoup some finances. What are you going to do? Keep sitting on these movies without making money from them? That's the point. Why can't you come back and at least do something here? I mean, this is where you know you're going to make money back on these movies. When you know there's a box office hit, when Black Widow comes back, listen, that's what Tenet was trying to do the thing out there as well. It was trying to stay on and at least get out there. Because remember this as well, you movie people. Do you understand how crowded the movie schedule is going to be next year and the year after that because all these movies are being pushed back? What chance are you going to have in the wide releases? Now, sure, you could say, oh, well, there's a lot of movies that are going to be left in production. They're not going to be able to be released right away, so it's going to work itself out. Sure, you could make that argument. But for right now, when you had movies that were scheduled to get out here now, and you put out all that money, you want to keep sitting on not having that money to recoup back. When you could probably take some kind of an approach to get the movies out there, plan on getting them exhibited for a longer time, like the old days where movies didn't stay in for like 4 weeks or 6 weeks and then go away after the 60 or 90 day window. Let them stay for a few months. We're trying to get people back to the movie theaters. And if the people need to go and wait until things get a little bit better, or we're waiting for movie theaters to come back for those, then do that. What is so hard about that? And it's not like people are being so scared. I mean, I have no problem going to the movie theaters this past weekend to go. Masks, social distancing. The movie theaters did everything right. Okay, they did everything right. They did it. I'm glad they did. So by Labor Day weekend, according to this New York Times article, 68% of the United States movie theaters were open. It got $9.4 million in its first opening weekend in North America. But again, I mean, there were parts of South Florida that still did not. Now we're just getting movie theaters back. And there are other major metropolitan areas that cannot come back out. I think Nashville still can't go. You got New York. You probably got Philadelphia. I mean, I don't know what other areas don't have movies right now, but we're waiting. We have to wait. So theaters remain closed in New York and Los Angeles. And when it was being played, even with theater capacity limited to 50% or less in most locations. Remember that too. Every movie theater cannot have a full house. They're all here at half capacity. So it's going to take time for all those movies to go ahead and recoup money. In those scenarios, for Tenet in 2 weeks to get $30 million, that's pretty damn good. It is. There's not a lot of drive-thrus to go to. Where else are you going to go see it? So let's continue here in this story. Box office analysts noted that Tenet is a complicated cerebral movie with little star power. You know what? What are you talking about? John David Washington has been starring in movies now. Okay, he was a star in BlacKkKlansman. And he's been in other movies where he's been a standout. Listen, he's got clout. Come on, it's Denzel's son. Don't tell me he doesn't have any clout. Plus, it had a lot of promotion behind it. But remember, that promotion was 6 months ago. And then more about a year ago, because they were promoting that for 6 months leading up to it. So if you have no way to go ahead and promote the movies coming out, what are you going to do? So they said that maybe a frothier, more escapist offering may have had an easier time coaxing people back to cinemas. Well, what movies did we have available that were going to do that? Okay. Unhinged, that's a movie that brings out like January, February. That might get like $20 to $40 million in box office sales for a Russell Crowe movie like that. I don't think it would get much more than that. Bill Ted Saving the Music, I don't know if it would have pulled $100 million. I don't think so. I just don't know if it had the kind of push. I think it was a Keanu Reeves thing. You could probably get to that point maybe. I don't know how good the movie was. And then what else? New Mutants? Well, looks like New Mutants didn't do that well anyway. It was also hurting in the theaters, as we noticed. And think about it like this. The movies that were supposed to come out in 2020, there are so many here that we can talk about. Of the ones that were still left that could have been scheduled. Look at this, okay? You still had All Rise, Legal Blonde 3, Malignant, Run, Spell, The Green Knight. There was a lot of movies that were able to come out and they were going to put out. Greenland as well. But they all had to wait. And that's the other thing. I saw certain movies that were going to come out that did not come out yet. We haven't seen them yet. We're not going to have a normal run of widescreen releases until January 2021. What do you expect the movie industry to do? At least they're open trying to get something going. And the thing is, Hollywood could have done a better job of at least opening the doors to get more movies to come out. This is where you just get any movies to come out. The opportunities were here. If you had other movies that you could get out that might not have performed as well, just get some new movies out there. Something new would work. But nobody's thinking about that. And they should have. They should have. So in the story, they say, whatever the reason, the bottom line was strikingly clear. People aren't going to the movies at anywhere close to the numbers that Hollywood hoped. And things are not expected to improve in the near term. Well, you say that, but then you don't realize, look at the issues that you have right now to try to get all these movies back, and the obstacles they're being put in place. Even the obstacles, if they're getting half capacity, if they're able to get at least movies to go ahead and get some money back, Tenet is a box office draw. It is. And if it did have its normal run, it probably would have pulled $50 million the opening weekend, probably would have made its money back, and probably would have crossed the $200 million barrier worldwide. That could have possibly happened in 2 weeks, but it's not. And that's what happens. What are you going to do? Now, they're saying the studios are starting to push new movies out. So one of the ones I still said on here was Wonder Woman 1984. Original date was June 5th, but at the moment now, they're trying to say, well, when is Wonder Woman going to be scheduled? Well, at the moment, it's still scheduled now to be scheduled on Christmas Day. And we'll see how it's going to work out. I think somebody's got to be there for Christmas Day. The Christmas movie season, to have that right there, to stretch it all the way to January, I think it's very important. So they're saying they retreated last week, but again, it pushed back a couple of months. It was originally going to be in October. Now it was going to be back earlier than that, but it's been pushed 3 times. So it's still here. So 3 studios are convening meetings on Monday to discuss how to proceed with other scheduled releases, leaving theater owners without much new to offer for the next 2 months. Well, like I said, we have to wait till November. So they have to go. So movie theaters have to be creative on what they could do, and they're trying to do some things, bringing some classic movies back, trying to do something to get people back in to go and watch movies. That's what we can do. But again, Hollywood did not prepare for this. You had 6 months. You could have, honestly, offered a couple of movies that might not have performed that well. At least you could have put some new movies out there and get them out there. Even the Oscar-nominated stuff, you could have put that out and get it noticed and give them widescreen releases. I mean, how much are you going to have to... What, is it the cost of trying to get those movies into the exhibition? Or what you think you're going to make on video on demand? The point is, what movies are making $100 million right now? Except for what? Bad Boys for Life and Trolls World Tour. How many movies actually were able to make over $100 million in 2020? Is anybody expecting that right now? How about making money back? And especially at this point, taking some movies that you think, well, they might not have been rated that well. They might not have done that well. But at least they're new movies. You could have put them out, have a chance to get an audience, and not in a crowded field. But then 2021 comes around, and it's going to be jam-packed. Or you're going to have to hold to try to make some money back on your movies until the next year and wait 2 years for that. Is that what you want? MGM and Universal had originally scheduled the slasher remake Candyman, and that was pushed to next year. And like I said, Greenland is scheduled to be later this year, but we don't know when the date is. And now there's still some word that Marvel's Black Widow and Pixar's Soul are 2 films that are coming out in November that could still be in question, but they don't know yet. But again, there's nothing been said. So if there is, we'll find out. And it's not as if Christopher Nolan, a director, can't get some movies out there. But again, the problem is, in his last few movies, he's not done any stinkers. The guy puts out good quality movies. He did Inception, Interstellar, and Dunkirk. And they all opened in the $50 million range for their opening weekends and would all collect between $527 and $837 million worldwide. Bulk of sales did come overseas. Theater owners must now put their faith in these 2 factors out of their control. Studios staying the course with end-of-year releases, and New York and Los Angeles, along with San Francisco, allowing theaters to reopen. So we have to see that happen. It's got to come up. So Death from the Nile is still going to be coming out, and we'll still have Black Widow and No Time to Die that should still be around for November. Another problem is Mulan left to Disney Plus. Do you know how much money that would have been made in the exhibitors, in the movie theaters? I would have gone. I would have gone to see Mulan, and they took it away. And other movies they took away as well. Hamilton, Trolls World Tour, and Greyhound. They all would have done well in the theaters. The move has kept money flowing to studios, but analysts said it has undercut theaters by training consumers to expect new films to be instantly available in their homes. And then we're seeing a lot of promos for like movies like Antebellum. I just started seeing that on YouTube where they're saying, oh, it's available. And they're doing the same kind of trailers like it would be in a theater, but it would be available on Amazon Prime. And that's it. John Fithian, Chief Executive of the National Association of Theater Owners, he said in an email, quote, we're learning that markets are being reopened, cinemas having safety protocols, and studios releasing movies are all tied together. Open markets need safe cinemas. Movies need open markets. Cinemas need movies. All these things raise audience awareness and comfort in returning to movies. You can't do one at a time. Agreed. We need help here. The stocks for all these theaters are also hurting as well, which I remember I tried to put some money into, but I just got out of it. So AMC shares climbed to $7 on September 4th after Tenet arrived in U.S. theaters, but they have declined by about 17%. Cinemark has fallen 18% since September 4th. Cineworld down 14%. But again, it's pump and dumpers, okay? Come on. They got some investors to come in, push the price up, a couple of swing traders, pushing on some calls to get up high, and then bail out for a quick cash grab. That's what it was. Now, here's one of the things that's very important. Recent customer surveys have shown 97% customer satisfaction with safety protocols. My point, everything that's got to be said is that the movie theaters have done their job. They've done their job. They're doing everything safe. They're doing everything right. It's a great experience. If I didn't have the mask, it would be perfect. Otherwise, it's fine. Quote, we spent millions and millions of dollars getting this stuff right. If we can convince this consumer that we have done all these things, they're much more likely to want to come back. Now, when it comes to the three largest film markets, expectations are tempered for both LA and San Fran because of the strict metrics California Governor Gavin Newsom recently announced as part of reopening plans. For New York, though, exhibitors and studio executives are incensed that Governor Andrew Cuomo has given no specific timetable for when movie theaters can reopen, as he coupled the reopening with large crowd places like concert venues and amusement parks. Meanwhile, bowling alleys and restaurants are able to resume indoor operations, which in our area, reopening in Florida, bowling alleys and movie theaters were together. So you could have some crowds in there, but not large crowds right now. We're still under capacity, at half capacity as it is. Not only is New York crucial for sales, much of the media coverage and online buzz surrounding the movies is generated from there. Regal Cinema's Chief Marketing Officer Ken Thew says, quote, the industry needs New York to open as soon as possible. Governor Cuomo's done a great job. He's placating to the governor, getting it under control, but we really need him to give cinemas the same thought he's given to the restaurant industry and let us resume operations. So as we said, there were other movies that came out besides Tenet, The New Mutants, and Unhinged. Again, they've only made $15 and $14 million respectively. Again, Tenet has made $177 million worldwide as of this reporting. So if the U.S. can get its public safety under control, people will start going out to movie theaters again. But this is not upon the movie theaters. They've done their job. It's upon all the locations where all these movie theaters are at. They have to get themselves together. So we're going to have to wait. So now for the industry side, we're going to go through that because that was New York Times basically giving the gist of from a consumer view. Let's go and look at the actual view of the industry view from Variety and Kevin Tran. Again, remember, the U.S. market, 35% of theaters are still closed. Making comparisons to pre-COVID openings is pointless because Tenet rolled out amid an unprecedented global pandemic. Correct. And I'm thankful that the people at Warner Brothers decided to go ahead and put Tenet out there. Gave me the reason to go back to the movie theaters. I am a diehard movie fan. I want to go back to the movie theaters. I want to have a reason to go to the movies because that's my Friday night thing. Tenet was able to open on more screens per multiplex than other Warner Brothers could typically command. There's just so few movie titles available. Now, Morning Consult had a survey out that said 18% of those surveyed between September 10th and September 13th reported feeling comfortable returning to cinemas, up from 12%. But again, we're not talking about actual theater goers. We're just going after all U.S. adults that were surveyed, which there's still a lot of people that will not just regularly go to the theaters unless it's a really big movie, because it's a bit of a cost for them, especially if you get a lot of kids. And the most important thing for Warner Brothers to put the movie out was the fact that the movie could not be put out through premium video on demand. It was never an option. The film cost too much to make, and a theater proponent like Nolan was too important for the studios to displease. But still, I still feel like Tenet's going to make its money back. Could it have made $300 to $500 million? Sure. It still does have the overseas numbers, which is helping a lot. So it can make more money. I really believe that can happen. They're going to still have that, and and again, the movie theaters over there are also going to be the same issue as here. So you got to think about that. There's probably still some theaters that are not available yet, as we very well know. And when you want to put the comparisons out there, by the way, the box office for Mulan, which did get released overseas, in China it got $29 million in ticket sales. For China. And I'm sure China could have probably pulled much more than that. $45 million worldwide box office. That's it. So Tenet, when you look at things, they're doing pretty damn good for what it's worth. Tenet is getting the money out there, and it's going to make its money back. I really wholeheartedly believe that. So we'll just wait and see what they're going to do. Now, moving along as well, we have a story I want to bring up about what the movie theaters, the studios, and others could be doing to help because of the fallout. So again, this is only in 1 month. Really in like 3 weeks that we started getting movies back. It wasn't until late August, at the end of August, right before Memorial Day, did we get it back. But again, nobody should be panicking. We're only 3 weeks in. That's it. Now, Anthony D'Alessandro says it right. He says, this isn't a death knell piece for exhibition, nor this is more rhetoric to freak studios out and have them delay even more movies. Studios, you've created enough damage in that space. It's more a come to Jesus moment. Studios and exhibitors, really, you've got to work together. Amen. I've heard you try to work for months together during the pandemic before Tenet's anticipated July opening, but there was a lot of division, not just between yourselves, but also among rival studios. I bet you that panic porn and the journalism didn't help. If there was ever a divide between exhibition and distribution, it's now. And some says it's a systemic failure. Yeah, there's a systemic failure for you. Not to mention the fact that you're also dealing with all the issues with everything going on with the issues that came around with AMC and Universal with the whole changing of the theatrical window. That did not help either. And seeing certain movies go to premium video on demand did not help either at all. That was very underhanded to the people that have put out so much to you, just because you get a bigger cut of what you make. He also mentions here in the story that San Diego County could roll back the being a purple zone, potentially impacting and shutting down theaters. But, don't worry, Kohl's will remain open, he says. Because of Wonder Woman 1984, Candyman, Greenland, and Black Widow's move deeper into the calendar, some exhibitors may have to shut down Monday through Wednesday, given the lack of product over the next month. We've talked about the next movies that are coming out. The length of the desert for exhibition will last until November 20th, when MGM's 007 feature No Time to Die finally opens. Already, for its theaters in smaller markets, Regal is planning to cut their show times to stay financially sound. One big circuit insider that wanted to stay off the record, he said this, quote, "You want consumer confidence? Because this is never going to fix itself. We, as exhibitors, need to stay open." He also says the reopening of New York, LA, and San Francisco will not solve box office problems overnight. This isn't as simple as Tenet at the box office. It's a much bigger psychological issue. One rival studio boss says about movie going during the pandemic, quote, There's a lot of mixed stimuli that is safe and not safe right now, and that's throughout all industries. It's all about conditioned behavior. And for 6 months, we've been telling you could be hurt if you're out inside a venue away from home. What do you expect? Again, the media did not help this at all. The media hurt this more than anything else. Now, there's some word that filmmakers and stars are lobbying Andrew Cuomo to get the movie theaters back open again. We'll see what happens with that. They also try to say that the NATO, the National Association of Theater Owners, was being sluggish with the Cinema Safe campaign. I don't really take too much into that. I think everybody was doing the right thing with all the things they need to do with electrostatic sprayers and really extra cleaning in the bathrooms and extra cleaning of the facilities and more sanitation as needed and contactless delivery of concessions. I think all was being done correct. Now, this also, Mr. D'Alessandro also trying to talk about that NATO needs to order a medical study showing it's actually safe to be in a movie theater, socially distanced, wearing a mask, and with strangers. Well, he says that, in this story, what we know thus far, no one has contracted COVID from a movie theater. Such a study could go a long way in convincing stars that it's okay to promote a movie. So he also says here, for the major movie studios, you don't have to pitch or administrate the message that it's safe to return to theaters, but you can help paying the ad bill. Studios could financially assist a digital and 3D exhibition revolution, so why can't you help fund the national PR campaign to return to movie theaters? Agreed. They should do that. I totally agree with that. But of course, for whatever reason, the commercials that we have out there still have to show us in quarantine, we're all in these trying times, right? We can't show people actually going out and reopening and getting back out there. You've seen in local commercials for national commercials? Absolutely not. They can't do that. That's where we are. For those that are here, like myself, you would want the movies to come back. All of you that they're content creators, those that want to get back into the movies, get to go and have movies coming back. Don't you want all that back? Because I know I would. He ends up saying that, there was too much pressure on Tenet to be looked at as a feature that would save the domestic box office. And some say it was too early for movie theaters to reopen with no vaccine yet in sight. But I still think for moviegoers, it's still safe to come back now. Again, people are social distancing. They're wearing masks. There's so many different ways to go and sanitize yourself in a movie theater. Contactless delivery. It's being done right. I just hope more people can realize that. What can I say? I wanted to spend 45 minutes ranting about that, and I did. Pretty easily, because I enjoy the movie theaters. I'm a big fan of it. So I really hope that things will work itself out. A couple things I want to bring up to wrap tonight's program up in a nice little bow. Hollywood Reporter puts out a story that was really interesting about daytime television and the abusive workplace culture. So Hollywood Reporter put out a very interesting piece. Daytime TV's dark side, former TMZ on TV, Ellen, and Rosie employees detail abusive work culture. We talked recently about producers for the Ellen DeGeneres show, Ed Glavin and Kevin Lehman, and the head writer, co-executive producers Jonathan Norman were dismissed following an investigation into workplace toxicity, sexual harassment, and discrimination. Then a former TMZ on TV staffer who worked at the company from 2015 to 2020 filed her own discrimination complaint, claiming Harvey Levin's celebrity gossip outlet had subjected her to years of misogynistic indignities, only to fire her after she went to HR. And then there was a scathing expose published by BuzzFeed News alleging that TMZ is a hotbed for racism, misogyny, and verbal abuse. I haven't watched TMZ in a long time, but I think also with the pandemic that's come across, I've really lost the interest in celebrities. I really have. Celebrities don't matter so much when they're not putting out movies, putting out TV shows. Our musicians are still putting out music, which is really smart. They can do that. But when it comes to the celebrities, they didn't really do much help to kind of quell the nerves of people that were in panic porn, watching all the panic porn that's going on television of the news. Instead, they're trying to help you control and be kept under control. Accept the quarantine, accept the lockdown. No. I just can't do that. I mean, be locked down like that? No, I just don't agree with that. So Telepictures, they do a lot of different programs, and a Hollywood Reporter investigation into Telepictures, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers Television, revealed it's a repeat offender when it comes to breaches of professional protocol. They did interviews with more than 24 current and former employees, both at the studio and on its shows. The culture, which was once typified the rough and tumble world of syndicated TV, has simply not kept up in step with the rapidly changing times. One of them they talk about was Rosie O'Donnell's show, ran from 1996 to 2002. Several key figures in the Ellen and TMZ affairs were executives on Rosie, were later shuffled around to do other shows like the Bonnie Hunt Show and the Tyra Banks Show. And similar problems would arise, according to multiple people with knowledge of the situations. Andy Lassner, who's one of the original Rosie producers, works at Ellen as an executive producer. He said, quote, what you had at Ellen are showrunners who came from notoriously toxic environments. Actually, that was somebody else that said that. A former Telepictures producer who worked at the company in the early 2000s. Not Andy Lassner. Let me correct that. So what resulted was the worst of all those worlds. A place where the executive producers cater to the host, restrict virtually every other staffer's access to the host, and then make you work 80 to 90-hour weeks almost for sport because that's what they had to do. So there were instances that were reported of verbal abuse, frequent and unwanted firings, and conversely vague contracts that made it difficult to leave, overworking, instances of gender discrimination, absent or ineffective human resources departments, and nepotism. And I'm sure that probably goes on in every studio out there. I wouldn't be surprised. In Hollywood, no surprise here at all. But there were people that were willing to go and talk about it. One Telepictures previous producer, says late night shows, which were historically the more stressful nowadays, are much happier places than daytime shows. They go into the whole story of Telepictures itself and how the whole history was behind it. They give you a lot of background and story to it. So Ed Glavin, who was one of the most talked about in all these shows, he worked first at Jenny Jones, then went to work at the Queen Latifah Show and the Larry Elder Show before co-executive producing Ellen. And then the real co-host, the comedian and insecure actor Amanda Seales, talked about that there should be more black leadership at the talk show for The Real, hosted by a panel of women, black, Asian, and Latinx descent. She left the show after 6 months, explaining in an interview, quote, because the people at the top are not respecting the necessity for black voices to be at the top too. Then there were the fact of Ellen staffers being racially insensitive. There were jokes being said involving the N-word in the offices in the 2010s and 2010s, excuse me. At TMZ, multiple former female employees say they routinely experience gender discrimination 1,000%. One of the people said, Harvey gives men preferential treatment. The running joke, quote, is that when a girl speaks, he doesn't look in your direction. It's like he doesn't see you. He really only listens to what the guys have to say. It's always sexist and disgusting and just offensive. Well, I don't remember that when I used to watch the TMZ show. I used to remember there were a number of different girls that were always called on. They talked all the time. And there was a time where that show was actually kind of fun. But I guess in that toxic environment with intersectionality and all the different things that are going on with social justice, it's just made that whole environment toxic. Because I think people were able to go and talk before. But I think politics has also gotten into play. It's also happened like that too. Because notice all of our TV's like that now. It's got much more intersectionality, much more virtue signaling, much more social justice. For whatever good or bad that is. But is it much more fun? Obviously, we're seeing that the people behind the scenes are not happy. And there's a lot more toxic decline in all these areas. There's a lot of stuff they bring in that story. A lot. But anyway, if you want to go and catch the story, you can go ahead and take a read for yourself. I put all the links to all the stories I talk about at broadcasterspodcast.com. So please go look at the page and find them there. So you can take a look at all the stories I bring up and read them for yourself. I also post them on my Twitter page at King of Podcasts or on Facebook at King of Podcasts. It's all there for you. Okay, a couple other stories I want to bring up before I wrap things up. In the news and journalism, I've been thumping about that for a long time. Our news companies already putting diversity pledges on the back burner. This is from Neiman Lab. That writers reveal problems at Chicago Magazine and The Atlantic damages trust with transgender readers. So journalists are starting to say that employers have done little to live up to their promises of diversity and inclusion pledges. So again, all talk, no action. Same thing I was saying before on my When I'm Not Podcasting series about the performative allies, whether they were corporations or they were just individual people following along because that was just the beat of the drum to follow. So talking doesn't do too much as it does for doing something about it, making significant change to systemic or racial injustices. So in the story they said that Digiday, by many accounts, plans to hire black employees have been stalled by hiring freezes and communication surrounding action steps has slowed. At their worst, these failures again lead to the all-familiar practice where lower-ranking employees are left to create and maintain diversity and inclusion strategies, rarely with added financial support. The failure to fulfill diversity commitments is especially evident at National Public Radio, NPR. Employees at the national desk and member stations have fought for years to increase diversity at every level of the company, but little progress has been made. And then, September 9th, the SAG-AFTRA union for the NPR responded to that need with a list of demands for management and promises for reform within the guild itself, stating, quote, "It has not been sufficiently vocal or public in its support of black, brown, indigenous, and Asian employees." So I can appreciate the fact of people trying to actually go ahead and follow through to make sure that changes are met, and it's not just based on the news cycle, right? The created and crafted news cycle, I might add. Very interesting, that story. There's a lot more to say about that, but I just wanted to make that point. Listen to that. Check that out. Okay, one more thing. Interesting story in the world of music. Nobody's talking about it yet, except for music business worldwide, and this program, it looks like. So here's the story about this. G and their CEO, Hartwig Masich, seemingly avoided the hits business in favor of a repertoire strategy focused on established and proven artists and songwriters. But now, with their debt margin being over 20%, the EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, over 20%. So they have money to work with. This big major music publisher, they turned in an impressive first 6 months of 2020. Revenues over $308 million in the first 6 months to end June, up 4.8% year to year. And this came from the publishing side, 69% of their business, but a 31% chunk came from recorded music. Streaming was at the heart of its growth, with recorded music streaming revenues year over year up 26%. So some of the songs you had that were part of the TikTok generation is Curtis Waters' Stunnin'. These are all like TikTok favorites. Kankara's Banana, featuring Shaggy, which now has nearly 1 billion streams. And KSI's Dissimulation, the biggest debut artist album in the UK across the first 6 months of 2020. So they say now the value of owning IP in music today is measured at 30 times contribution margin. So the idea would be wondering aloud whether some activist shareholders could push for major music companies to spin out their catalog rights onto the stock market, rather than their whole operation in pursuit of a bigger short-term valuation. And the question is, would it be a realistic possibility? That's the idea. Now, in this story, this being said, is that in music, there's a prediction that it could hit the industry especially hard because there's a lot of companies where both rights and operations are muddled into one relatively successful model. Obviously, a couple of companies in particular sit on incredibly invaluable IP, and the returns they create don't reflect all the true value of those assets. Shareholders could scratch and say, wait a minute, what if we create our own hypnosis and put our assets into a separate company vehicle and make it publicly available? So the reason of this idea would be that for artists and songwriters, it would give them strong positioning and renegotiations for their rights. Renegotiations. If you have parts of your publishing rights revert, you could really put a gun to every publisher's head and say, hey, here's the benchmark. Can you match it and make me happy? So again, just another bargaining play for, again, artists and songwriters to get more royalties, to get more money. I can understand that. I can appreciate that. Not a bad idea. At the end of the day, you have to look at a world where artists, managers would like as few partners, as reliable partners as possible, creating an interesting perspective on the future of the music industry. Low-hanging fruit for a company like BMG is always to extend your relationship with an artist into neighboring rights or into merchandise. But another interesting area is everything to do with events and the live business. If you're in that business, you have the best data regarding who actually has the biggest fans of your act. It's the person that bought the $100 tickets rather than the $9.99 Spotify subscription. We are privileged to have a very close relationship with our artists. We are always thinking about how we can expand those relationships and add more value. So again, it's to make money. And if the artists and songwriters can make more money, that's a good thing too. And BMG serves a lot of different music labels, a lot of record labels. Just keep that in mind. We're going to leave it there. Thank you for listening in, finding the show as you always do. We're just going to leave like this. Just remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program. The Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at KingofPodcasts.com.